Soulless Dead, Brotherhood, Chapter 2, If by Night. It was around 1 o'clock when we left, and we'd been driving for quite some time. 2, 3, 4, maybe a couple hours like that. I wasn't totally sure. The gentle rock of the truck on the highway was quite comforting, and it made me relax. I blared some music on my iPod with my headphones buried deep within my ears. A couple times I heard my parents argue, but I really didn't pay any heed to it and continued to sleep. It was kind of nice. It was really surreal, honestly. I didn't really think much about the dead wandering around, whether or not my best friends growing up were dead or alive, or whether or not the idea to go all the way to the middle of a flyover state was a good idea. We'd been driving for some time, and I awoke when we hit a bump on the road. My head gently knocked against the glass, enough to startle me a bit. I looked around and rubbed my hand on my forehead, which was cooled by the cold glass of the night. I looked around, and it was dark, and the signs would just pass as a blur, so I wasn't sure where we were at. I looked through the front window, only to see my parents holding hands quietly across the center console. I looked up through the window, and I saw some lights in the distance. We've been driving for quite some time, and I didn't feel a stop, but maybe once or twice. I asked my dad where we were at. He was a little surprised to see me awake. It was almost 5 o'clock. We've been driving for a little over 3 hours. He looked back, looked over, and he said, "We're pretty close to Harrisburg, Pennsylvania." I took a deep breath, and he'd definitely been booking it. My dad looked at the gas. We were getting a little low. We weren't quite empty, but my dad was always paranoid growing up in New York himself. His parents always ran out of gas during the rush hour, so he always made it a big deal to have at least half a tank. Well, we were well below that, since we'd been hauling across the countryside. We made it to the outskirts of Harrisburg to see a gas station. We parked a little further out, not knowing if there was anybody bad. The lights were on, but nobody was there. We could see bins and what appeared to be racks to be dragged out of the store, random candy bars laying on the ground. My dad, being in the Army, said that we should stay in and that he should go out and check. My mom was reluctant at first, but he convinced her. He took out his gun and grabbed a few more magazines out of the center console where he'd stowed them. My mom pulled out hers and held on to it and told me to stay in the car. At best, I had a pocket knife from when I was a Boy Scout and the ball bat still. He told us to keep down and quiet, kissed my mom on the head, came over and put his hand on his shoulder and smiled. He didn't say anything, but he just walked. I bit my lip and I clenched my hand around the baseball bat. I was definitely worried. My dad peeked through the glass, keeping low, looking around and didn't see anybody. I looked around outside the window to case the area just to be sure, making sure there wasn't any dead walking around. I was so surprised to not see all these people running around. I mean, Harrisburg was pretty large, I thought to myself. I saw a couple other buildings down the street. It was dark. The street lamps were just barely on. No cars, no nothing. Not so much as anybody wandering around. It seems like they were on top of it. Either that or the dead had been attracted by something else. My dad motioned for us to come in. My mom kept the headlights off as she moved her way over to the driver's seat and slowly pulled forward. We drove the truck, and he said to park it on the side of the gas station to keep it out of sight until we were absolutely sure we could get the pumps working. I looked around again, but I couldn't see much outside, so I slowly made my way in. My dad grabbed a couple trash bags and had us fill the bags full. Corn nuts, Skittles, you name it, we tossed it in there. We grabbed a bunch of soda pop, juice, water, and even milk. Although we tried to drink that as quick as possible. I grabbed one of the pre-made sandwiches and stuffed it in my mouth. I hadn't had anything to eat for quite some time, so it was definitely nice to get some food. My mom continued to grab stuff, and we were hauling bags full of candy and food and all kinds of preserved stuff. We stuck it in the back of the truck and kept it down below where our bags were. My dad was in the front of the store trying to get the gas pumps to work while we were in the back. And then we heard the door open. Me and my mom immediately got down and laid down. I peeked around the corner of the area we were hiding behind a shelf, and we could see two men. They were carrying ball bats. They were harassing my dad, telling him what he was doing, asking if he was lost. He said he didn't want any trouble, and that he's a doctor and he's just trying to get to his base. He's like, "Oh yeah," one of the men said out loud, mocking him. "They want all the doctors in a safe place, but they couldn't give a care about any of us." The other man laughed. They stared him down, and, "Why don't you just give us that handgun? Give us the truck you got parked out there, and we'll be out of your hair." My dad briefly looked over to where we were at. His eyes grew wide. One of the men caught on to this and looked over to where I was at. I quickly slid back before he could see. "What you got hiding over there?" one of the men said as he started to walk. The other man, holding his ball bat tight in his hands. My dad said, "Don't. It's food. I haven't had anything for a while. I drove up here, and I'm just worried." The man stops and looks back, smirking. "I doubt it. Let's go see what he's got." My dad quickly pulled the gun out and said, "I don't want any trouble," as he pointed at them. His hands were shaking. "I just want to get some food and get some gas, and I want to get the heck out of here. I'm sure you boys don't need me putting around in you." They both turned around. "What are you going to do about it?" My dad said, Please, I don't want any trouble." Inside my head, I was gritting my teeth. "Come on, Dad, shoot him. You've done this before. Shoot them." "I'm a doctor. If you need any help." I kept thinking no as he tried to compromise. "Just shoot them. That's all you need to do." It must have been hard for my dad. The men laughed right at his face. One of them started to climb over the counter, trying to get at him quickly. The other man circled around. My dad put a round in the man on the countertop, put it through his shoulder, and came out the side of his ribs. He rolled on the counter, falling down to the ground hard, his head whipping against the ground. The other man ran across, swung the bat, and knocked the gun out of my dad's hands across the floor. The other man lay there in a massive pool of blood. It was coming out quick. He was gurgling and moaning and screaming out loud. My mother came from out behind the shelves. She pulled out her gun, and my dad was wrestling with the other man. He pulled out a knife and pushed him out from behind the countertop. I was scared out of my mind, so I grabbed my bat and ran out. "Dad," I yelled at my son. He said, "Son, get behind! Get away from here!" The man looked up and was like, "I'm going to kill you in front of your family." He gritted his teeth and told my mom to put the gun down. She lowered it and laid it on the ground. "That's right. Now kick it over to me." Just as my mother did so, my dad looked at him, wrapped his hand around his wrist, pulled it down, pulling the knife to the ground near him. He then proceeded to put his other palm into the man's face, quick and hard. It jarred the man's neck back, and then he put the man in some sort of arm bar, switching him over, laying him on the ground, and pulling his arm out of socket. The man was a little larger, so he was actually able to pull his arm back and punch my dad off of him. The man reached for his knife, but my dad was able to grab a can of chili off the ground and slap it against the side of his head. It knocked him over. My dad grabbed the knife out of his hands and stuck it right between his ribs. The man's hand was on my dad's hair, pulling it. My dad burying the knife deeper and deeper. We could hear it dragging against his ribs. A popping noise made, and the man on the ground jabbed. His whole body went tight, and then his arms started to fall loose. My dad twisted the knife and yanked it out. The man let out a loud cough and a wheeze. My mom picked her gun back up. My dad grabbed his. His hand was bleeding. Son, do you have something? I looked around and I grabbed some rags off of the shelf. We wrapped his hand up. I don't think it's broken. The gun took most of the damage. As he wrapped his hand and held his wrist, he wandered around looking for it, eventually finding it and placing it into his back pocket. One of the men was looking at us. He was still alive. Coughing. He let out, "This is what you gotta do," staring right at me. And I'm not sorry for it. He took a deep gasp, let it out slowly, and he just laid there, glassy-eyed. My dad picked up the long knife and stuck it through the back of his head. The body twitched a little bit, and then went limp once more. Just to be sure. "Honey," he handed her a knife, "stick it in his head. You need to know how to do this. Right in the temple." My mom had never seen this sort of thing. She looked like she was about to break down. No, I can't do this. "Honey, you need to do it. I'm not about to have Danny do this. You need to be strong, honey. Martha, look at me." As he placed his bloody hands on her face. "You need to do this, okay? You need to do this." As he looked at her. Honey, look at me." My mom again was trying to look away, but he kept trying to get her to look at her eyes. "Please. I'm going to grab the stuff. I'm going to get Danny. We're going to get the pump started. I'm going to start pumping the gas, but we need you to do this." "Don't make me do it," my mom said as she started to cry. Please, honey, Martha!" Snapping his fingers. "It needs to be done. We don't know when we're going to need to do this. I'm not always going to be here." "Don't say that," my mom said. "Martha, I'll guide you through it. It's okay." He takes her by the hand with the knife held by both of them. She kneels down, looking away, covering her face with her eyes. "Honey, you need to see. You can hurt yourself. Come on." He grabbed her chin. "I don't want to do it." She tried to struggle a little bit, but he slowly started burying the knife in the side of the head. This man was long dead, so he really didn't jolt. She didn't like it. "Oh God, I can feel his skull. I can feel everything." "It's okay, just ignore it. You gotta put the blade in there, alright? Here we go. It's going all the way in." At that point, we could hear the blade sliding in and stopping. Okay, we've hit the other side of the skull. My mom let go and ran over and began puking in the corner. My dad grabbed the knife, pulled it out of his head. He wiped it off on the man's shirt and grabbed his sheath off of him and put it in. "Danny, I need you to hold on to this." I'd never seen something like this. I couldn't say anything. Danny boy, come on. "Hey, son." I shook my head. "Dad, I think I'm going to be sick. Come here, come on." I bent over and I vomited into one of the trash cans. It's okay, Dan. I need you to be strong. Go get your mother. I'll start the pumps. Head outside, okay?" I went over to my mom, put my hand on her back, and helped her up. She pulled her handgun out, looked around out the windows before we went outside. We moved the truck into position and we pumped gas. My dad came out a little bit later with a couple gas canisters that he found that they were selling on the racks. "We'll fill some of these up. I found 2. I found one in the back and one up here. Come on." They were large, too. About 5-6 gallons each. We filled them up and filled up the truck. We got in the truck and my mom was just crying, wiping away her tears with some tissue she had. My dad sat there for a moment and put his head on the steering wheel and took a few deep breaths. One of his hands was shaking as he was putting it on the shifter. "I'm sorry you guys had to see that," my dad said. My mother looked at him and laid her head on his shoulder. I really didn't know what to think about it. They were going to kill us if my dad didn't do something. Why was it such a bad thing, I thought? Why was it such a big deal? They were bad guys. They needed to die. They were going to hurt us. My dad started the truck and we made our way down the road. We continued to go for quite some time. Occasionally we'd see one of the dead, actually. One of the first. See them, my dad said? They're attracted to sound. Their eyes, their ears, they're bleeding out, as he explained to both of us. They can't see very well, if at all, from what we've noticed, he said. But man, they know how to bite. The sensors of pain. They can't feel anything. You gotta remove the head or damage the brain. See what I'm saying? He tried his best to put it into terms we could understand, but it still sounded alien despite his best efforts. I mean, how do you make sense of this? I mean, what can you do? My dad continued on. We just gotta be really careful and quiet around them, okay? We're in the truck, so we're safe. We won't have to worry about anything, as calm as he could. But you gotta damage the head. Danny boy, that bat you got, if one of them gets close, you push them away from you, and you get your chance to hit them in the head. If you hit them in the head, there seems to be swelling in the brain. It'll stun them. They'll either fall over or stop moving for a long enough time for you to hit them again. Danny, are you listening? Yes, Dad, I said quietly. Danny, he said again. Are you listening? Yes, sir. Yes, Dad. Good. Good boy. He looked over at Mom. Martha, I hope you're listening. For both of us, come on. She didn't say anything. Martha, please. I heard you. Hit him in the head. Okay, just hit him in the head. We're gonna get through this, my dad said after some silence. I'm not sure if he believed himself, but God, he wanted to. He wanted to so badly for the both of us. To think in the zombie apocalypse, the first thing we killed were people. I don't understand how my dad did it in the military. When it's the dead, you kind of dehumanize them. They're just shells ready to eat you. Spit your eyes out. Eat your brains. When it's people that are just trying to survive like you, it makes people do crazy stuff. I mean, I've seen the TV shows, I've seen the prepper stuff, but I really never could put a face to it. I never could put what it's like. I could never make sense of it. My dad looked back. If we're going to travel, we need to stay together. And if we're going to travel, we need to do it by night. We don't want people jumping us. We don't stop for anything. We don't do anything. Once we get to Kansas, we'll talk about it. One of their bases has still got to be safe. There's still hope.